I look at porn like any other drug, which is recreationally, with the caveat that you have control over it and it doesn't have control over you, it can be a lot of fun. I think sexual fantasy is both healthy and can be a lot of fun and rewarding. Where porn becomes a problem, like any other addiction, is where you're trying to solve for other issues in your life with it, and it's a solution for something else, or you're replacing something like real intimacy and real sexual connection for something that is not. The issue with fantasizing or porn that is observing and not involved, you have a different biochemical reaction to it. You get a huge dopamine spike, but you don't get the oxytocin that you do if you had actual sex with another human being. And so that dopamine feedback loop can get highly addictive and highly destructive over time, and it'll make it even harder to have real intimate connections with people. It also can create really unrealistic or too detached from reality expectations or stories around actual healthy sexual relationships. I'm not like absolutely against porn in the sense that it can be fun with a partner, it can be fun to explore different fantasies. Where it becomes an issue is where you're solving for some other area of your life and you become addicted to it, and the dopamine feedback loop gets so intense that you can't get yourself out of it. Ways to get yourself out of it: put controls on your phone or your screen time that block certain sites or block screen time. Hold yourself accountable, have somebody else hold you accountable. Shame lives in the dark, it lives in the shadows, and so you can get rid of shame by just having someone in your life that you can talk to about what you're going through and what this addiction is doing. Very often can release the shame, which will give you breathing room or freedom to do something about it. So I think it's what we're talking about. And in our society now, porn addiction is a much bigger deal because it's so much more accessible. It's so easy for anyone to get their hands on it. And so I think it's highly destructive when it becomes to a point of addiction for men and women, to then become to objectify the opposite sex. They get disconnected from their own bodies. They get disconnected from the other person they're with. And to be fair, there's a vast majority of people who experience sexual pleasure or with a partner. I don't know if it's the vast majority, I shouldn't say that, but it is not uncommon for people to have sex with somebody and it's more sex or masturbation with a partner than it is a language or a way to communicate love with someone. They're just using someone else to get off to. However, from a biochemical standpoint, that does seem to be healthier than porn because you're still getting the fuller range of biochemical responses that help induce a different kind of connection to the human. And so interesting study was done that showed looking at porn and imagining yourself involved in it instead of just watching, you get a different chemical addiction than as being the voyeur just observing, which is also super interesting to me, like what the implications of that are. But yeah, those are my thoughts on porn addiction. And I think if just to wrap this up though, I would say if you're trying to get free of it, first tell somebody, have somebody in your life that you feel comfortable talking to, deal with the shame. Usually people who have addiction in general have shame related to it. Find somebody in your life that you feel accountable to, that you can talk to about it. Talking to about it gets it out, right? Shame lives in the shadows. So if you can talk about it, you can get it out in the open. It'll give you breathing room to deal with it too. Put things on your phone or your computer or whatever you find yourself on when you're looking at it. Put restrictions on your phone that limit your ability to do that, and then create habits that mitigate that kind of behavior. So if you find yourself looking at porn in bed, don't bring your phone to bed with you. Keep it on in the bathroom or in another room. Also, you get very specific. If you're craving porn, one of the ways, something you can do to try to move yourself away from it is, instead of using porn to get off, try to masturbate with fantasy, like in your own head, instead of feeling like you need to look at something. Like, get connected to your own body instead of using something visual. Now, women tend to be better at that than men, in my experience, but you can still exercise the same kind of tools. Try to bring it back into yourself and get in touch with your own body. One of the things that porn kind of can break down is that attachment to yourself and to the other. It becomes this kind of separate, isolated thing, which is going to make intimacy much harder going forward.
So would you consider masturbation bad?
No, I think masturbation is beautiful for both men and women. I think with men specifically, I addressed this on a couple of different times. I've had a couple different people ask me about, does it impact your T count, right? Does sex impact your T count? Does not having sex impact your T count? And the answer is yes and no. Not having sex does seem to marginally improve your T count, and then yet having sex seems to improve your T count, but not right away. And so it does seem to have minimal impact on T count, but it does, specifically for men, ejaculating is like, it's a release of energy that mellows you out. So, for instance, in the old days, going into war, like for instance, the Roman Empire, they would, part of their kind of their routine leading up to war is that the men would not have sex days leading up to war, because they believed that chi, or that vitality, then they could translate into a different energy and be more prepared for battle. And so, I think kind of the timing is really important. And if you're addicted to masturbating, where you have to do it all the time, that could very well be the same extension. So if it's addiction, that's one thing. But I think in order to be effective with a partner, I think it is important for you to get to know your own body, how you respond, what you're into. And so, no, I don't think masturbation is wrong by any means. And I think our society is less that way now, but we used to demonize sexuality and masturbation in some really dysfunctional ways. I think graham crackers and Kellogg's were both designed as anti-aphrodisiacs. They were meant to deplete sex drive so that pubescent kids and young adults wouldn't feel the need or the urge to masturbate. At one point, we were putting spiky hands on kids so they wouldn't touch themselves. I wish I was making this up. Or chastity belts were a very real thing to try to keep people from experiencing pleasure. Humans are super fascinating to me in all the weird ways that we like functionally fuck up sexuality. But sexuality is beautiful, and it's most beautiful when it's freely expressed, and we're not all weird about it. But we certainly, throughout humanity's history, have done a pretty effective job at trying to control people's sexuality and their sexual expression in ways that is highly dysfunctional. And obviously, Freud sent the word. Freud, the father of psychology, and largely is known for psychosexual development, and was teaching these concepts during the Victorian era, coming out of the Victorian era, that was a highly sexually pent-up group of people. So I think self-love, masturbation, I think can be very healthy for the individual. But again, addiction of any kind, I would offer, is generally not healthy.